the fiscal target that we have set for ourselves. The Movement for Change also says they want to reduce the ratio of public expenditure to GDP to a target not more than 10% over 5 years. This is very difficult to achieve. Very, very difficult, because if you look at the last 7 or to 5 or to 8 years, our public expenditure share of GDP exceeds 10%. And at the moment, what the IMF is even targeting is trying to bring it down around 14 to 16%. And that is why that 3% the NPP said they are going to cut. When they do that, it actually tends to fall within some of the IMF target. And so this promise looks good. When my colleague comes, he also mentions some of the rationalizations they want to do, but it will be very difficult within our current context to achieve this 10%. Then they also want to offload 40% of the governing sovereign wealth fund to onto the Ghana Stock Exchange to be traded as Ghana Prosperity Bond. One of these is that we invest the Ghana Sovereign Wealth Fund abroad because of trying to secure the value and the returns. When you invest it outside, because we invest in dollars, we are able to protect how much actually comes in. But if we invest it on the Ghana Stock Exchange, exchange rate depreciation and values on the market depreciate, and we lose money around this. And another thing is that before we can do that, then the independent board that we have set within the PRMA, that's the Public Petroleum Revenue Management Act, the advisory board that we have set within that must agree as part of the investment plan of the GSW. Another thing is that they also want to increase tax revenue to a GDP ratio to a target of 20% over 5 years. Even what the IMF is estimating we will be able to achieve is to bring us to the level of our peers, around 14%, 16%. So this 20% is ambitious, but realistically, it's not achievable. Then they also want to reduce inflation to a single digit within 2 years. In 2 years, the lowest the IMF is estimating that we can get to is around 11%, given the rate at which it is falling. And also the fact that monetary policy rate will have to either go up or stay at the same trajectory. We are less likely to see any changes with that. And so that promise too is very, very difficult to achieve. They also want to fix the foreign exchange rate for importation. This, we think, is through interventionism, because the market determines the exchange rate. Now, if you want to fix it, it's either you create a shortage or you create a black market. Now we come to job creation. So under the NPP, they also want to establish and fully resource an SME bank to address the special financing needs of SMEs that are not addressed by traditional banks. So at the moment, we have set up so many financing institutions that is dealing with SME problems. We have the Ghana Enterprise Agency. We have the Development Bank Ghana. We have Maslock. We have the Startup Fund by the Venture Capital Trust Fund. Even now, they're also doing an SME program trying to mobilize money for SMEs. There is USTAT, there is NAPE. All of these programs are meant to address SME financing. So there is no need for capitalizing an SME bank. The reason why this SME bank is not needed is also because it will be set up as a development bank. Now, what development banks typically do is that they have to now find PFIs, private financial institutions, to be putting funds together to earn lend at a relatively lower interest rate. That is the same thing that Ghana Exim Bank is doing. That's the same thing that the Development Bank Ghana is also doing. So we will be creating complex competition among that same PFIs for what all of these streams of initiative that we have set up to do can do. So we think that in terms of addressing the financing needs of SMEs, it's not because there is no money. It's because the interest rates are higher. And that is why SMEs can't access finance. And so if government has set up funds that is supposed to make funds available to SMEs, then we should address the politicization of those funds so that all SMEs can have access to it. Another thing is that they also want to abolish the e-levy. And as I mentioned, the e-levy alone last year represented about 1% of our total revenue, but they don't provide a clear plan that after abolishing the e-levy, these are some of the short-term measures that can also bring in revenue. They also want to train 1 million youth in ICT. While we think that it is in line with global digitization and all of that, what we didn't see in the manifesto is that there was not a clear plan of specific skills that we want to fill, that skill gap analysis. We didn't see it in the manifesto. So which specific areas are we trying to be stronger? Is it in coding? Is it in AI? Is it in automation? What specific skill gaps that we are trying, so that we don't end up training people in Microsoft Word and Excel and put all of that together, that we have trained 1 million people in ICT. So that is what we are trying to avoid. And if you look at the TVET report, in terms of skills gap, they show a lot more skills gap around automation, where we have to apply higher level IT skills. So we think that as part of preparing this plan, there should have been a clear skills gap, and say that in the next 4 years, these are the 3 main skill gaps we want to close in Ghana. Then they also want to introduce a Ghana Industrial Master Plan, which will target increase in manufacturing GDP contribution to about 20%. This is how manufacturing has been performing over the last, let me say, 6 years. So you see that the share of GDP of manufacturing has not been growing very well. And in terms of its GDP growth rate, it's actually on a downward slope. And after 2020, manufacturing has not been performing well. It's one of the sectors that is struggling. And it is because of 2 main reasons. One is that the end user tariff for manufacturing is not competitive. Between 2023 and now, tariffs have actually increased by 71%. And in Ghana, the higher load tariffs or special load tariffs pay more tariff than residential. And so in terms of dollar rate, we see a lot more industries are paying more. So if you are not able to give competitive rates, manufacturing cannot grow. Another thing is that the cost of borrowing is very expensive. The Institute of Statistical and Socioeconomic Research did a sensitivity analysis and look at the challenges that industry face in Ghana. And the 3 things that came on top was access to finance, the exchange rate problems, and also macroeconomic constraints. We think that if you fix the economy, some of these issues are going to fix by themselves. If lending rates are low, inflation rate is low, and exchange rate is competitive, some of these sectors are going to fix themselves. And because of these challenges within the space, that is why the special economic zones that we have always set up didn't work. So if you look at the Dawa one on the Tema Flau stretch, it was expected to create over 80,000 jobs, but now it's creating just about 1,000 jobs, and just about a dozen firms are operating there. That is also because the macroeconomic environment is expensive. And that's the reason why industry is not working. The same applies to the secondary export zone that we set up. And some of those zones that we set up, they are not doing well. And that's why, even after doing 1D, 1F, we've not seen a cross-sectoral impact. That is a challenge, because the macroeconomic environment is expensive. And electricity tariff is one of the main things. For example, if they want to use this policy to accelerate aluminum industry, tariff cost is about 35% the cost of aluminum refinery. And so if your tariffs are not competitive like the ones in China that do about 0.08 cents, how then can they also compete? And so these are some of the underlying challenges that we think the manifesto did not address. And so that 20% target may not be achievable. When it comes to the NDC, their job creation proposal is anchored around the 24-hour economy. And so we took a little time to break down the 24-hour economy. And what we saw is that it focused on certain key sectors, and these are their anchor sectors for now. And if you try to group their anchor sectors, it has agro-processing, manufacturing, pharmaceutical, construction, and trading industry. And under services, we have financial service, sanitation, waste management, hospitality, retail centers, and transport. Then public services. Now, these public services are supposed to offer some services that will make sure that businesses are able to thrive. Now, the key interventions that they are proposing is that the NDC promises to implement a raft of tax incentives, but they did not specifically say that these are the tax benefits or the tax incentives that will be channeled directly for the 24-hour economy. Another challenge is that if you look at the public services category, you don't need all of them to be functioning like 24 hours in terms of fiscal presence. By way of automation and leveraging on digitization, some of these services, for example, like the DVLE, if their systems are enhanced, greater portion of their work can be automated, which means that citizens can access it at any point in time. If you look at financial services, because of the mobile money interoperability system, now people can do financial transactions by using their phones and all of that. So they may not have the need to be operating on 24 hours. Another challenge is that if you look at the hospitality industry, for them to operate 24 hours, there should be some incentives like one, access to credit must be cheaper, exchange rate issues, and also inflation. When we look at the current tourism report in 2023, the annual tourism report, apart from 5-star hotels that will occupy about 70% in a year, and the 3-star and 4-star occupy about 50%, all other accommodation facilities are doing just 33% occupancy. They are not really doing well. Even those that are actually operating 24 hours, there's a challenge. And so for them to effectively do that, then the incentive packages must be so strong. Then in terms of retail centers, we think are driven by demand. When there's demand, retail centers are going to operate that 24 hours. Another thing that we found when we did one report under a project called Global Voices is that there's an increase in electronic and automation in the way businesses do things on e-commerce. And so now more businesses are shifting to leveraging e-commerce to reach a lot more customers. And so they may not need to be operating 24 hours, but through e-commerce, their businesses can still run. So these are some of the dynamics that we find. But for example, customs, security services, health services can run on 24 hours. For example, if you look at the GPHA, it's more about implementing more efficiency, automation, and also a very good, effective shift system, and the ports can run 24 hours. At the moment, MPS run about 90% of containerized cargo, and so it is possible that you'll be able to engage and get them to run 24 hours. But what is important for us is the interventions. I've already mentioned that in terms of value chain, they don't specifically say what exactly the incentives will be. Under industrialization and agro-processing, manufacturing, pharmaceutical, all of these industries or industrialization sectors, if capital is not cheap, exchange rate is not stable, and GDP growth, access to credit is not that cheap, none of them will be able to operate on a 24-hour basis. And all of them operate also based on demand. But what was also interesting to us is that they said they will use time of use tariff. What the time of use tariff does is that it gives cheaper tariff at peak time so that you move a lot more people to operate around the off-peak period so that there's not heavy load during the peak time. So you avoid load shedding. That's all about the time of use tariff system. So what happens is that if your peak time is within this period, you try to give cheaper tariff during the off-peak, so people move their businesses or their activities to the off-peak periods. This thing, if they give a lower tariff below what the PURC sets, the challenge is that we are going to create a lot more under-recoveries within the energy sector. One, we have very low collection rate, higher distribution commercial losses and technical losses. That is creating a lot more under-recoveries within the energy sector. Now, energy sector debt, the IMF estimate that it will reach about $2 billion by 2026. When the fund did the program, the target that they set was that it was going to stay around $1 billion. Thank you very much, Caleb. So what they mentioned was that they are going to let it stay around $1 billion, but that target cannot be achieved. But we look at the job creation potential of our country. What we saw in about 20-year analysis that has been done was that our growth does not actually create jobs. So we look at our growth and job creation elasticity, and we realize that average growth of 5% that we have achieved between 1999 to 2013, job creation was just 0.5%. So every 1% growth in GDP, just about 0.54% of jobs were created. And so that job creation potential may not be achieved. Then under job creation, the NDC also want to set up a women's development bank, and I've already explained why we don't need another separate bank only for women. We have a lot of programs that actually cater for SME financing, and that there wouldn't be any need also for that. Similarly, the National Employment Trust, we don't need to set up a trust. We have enough initiatives that we must continue. Then the movement for change to also talk about labor reforms, which we see that they are not really responding to the needs of job creation. Then under agriculture, one of the key anchor promises is that the NPP want to use GESAL to de-risk agriculture. And what that means is that GESA was an innovative financing to make available more money for agricultural financing. Now, the challenge GESA is facing is that it is facing difficulty getting PFIs to mobilize long-term capital for these businesses. Another challenge is that because we are not able to do proper climate change forecasting, it's difficult to forecast climate vulnerabilities into our lending. And that's why GESA is also struggling. Another thing that the NDC want to do is that they want to facilitate production of at least 100,000 tons of cotton. Currently, we are doing around 400 kilograms per hectare, and so they want to accelerate this. And to accelerate this, then these smallholder farmers need access to fund, seeds, fertilizers, and also secure land tenure. What is interesting is that they also want to revamp the collapsing poultry industry. The reason why poultry industry is not working, when IMANI, we did an analysis of reversal of the benchmark values, what we found is that it is because of the exchange rate, the cost of feeding, and also the high cost of input. That is why poultry was not doing well. And so the manifestos must address those problems, else we can't fix poultry issue. Now, they also want to reintroduce the fertilizer distribution. We have distributed over 1.4 million metric tons of fertilizer between 2017 and 2021, but still our fertilizer application is below the ECOWAS declaration. That's about 50 kilograms per hectare. That is also because most of the fertilizer were smuggled, and the government created debt for itself, and the NDC wants to reintroduce it, which means that they will need much more stronger, transparent, and accountable systems. Else, we still go back to creating debt for ourselves. We did an assessment in the cocoa sector. Averagely, cocoa farmers produce about 457 kilograms per hectare. With that production and an average family size of 6, no cocoa farmer will be able to achieve a living income. And that is why young people do not like cocoa. Again, galamsey and also other climate issues are affecting cocoa production. And so getting young people in cocoa farming, we need to work on our pricing as well as securing the industry from the threats of illegal mining. Also, the Movement for Change is trying to target single-digit interest credit facility. This is very difficult because it means you have to then intervene in the work of the Bank of Ghana, and that is very interventionism. Then agro-parks that they want to also implement, it's very difficult to achieve that. Under tourism, the NPP is proposing that they want to make Ghana as a conference of exhibition destination. We brought down the trade fair and said that we are going to raise 2 billion to build the trade fair. As at now, that 1 billion investor program that we hosted, we've not been able to raise it, so we can't do that. In their recent report to SIGA, their main revenue was from renting the place for events, and so we will not be able to achieve that. Then the NDC is proposing that they will partner private sector to build ultra-modern recreation villages. But we find a lot more of these recreation centers and theaters that have been abandoned. And so we think that the promise should